The Christian Church has always wrestled with the interpretation of Scripture, realizing both how important it is and also sometimes how difficult it is to get it right. And certainly the opening chapters of Genesis have been a topic of much debate throughout Christian history.
The Bible is very important to me, but it's very important to recognize the Bible is not a book. The Bible is a library. It has all sorts of different kinds of writing in it. It has history, it has stories, it has poetry, it has prose. When we read Genesis 1, we have to figure out, what am I reading? Am I reading a divinely dictated textbook to save me the trouble of doing science? Or am I reading something, in fact, more interesting and profound than that?
We're inclined by our culture to think of the creation narrative as an account of material origins, because we think about the world in material terms. For us, that's kind of what's important about origins. People come to Scripture thinking that they need to integrate it with science, and so they want to either read science out of the Bible or they want to read science into the Bible. That's not the way to do it, because inevitably you end up making the text say things that it never meant to the ancient audience. In the ancient world, they didn't have a line between supernatural and natural. God was in everything. You couldn't talk about God intervening, because you can't intervene in something that you're doing. And to them, God was doing it all.
Telling a story about somebody who constructs something in 6 days, it's a temple story. It's about God making a place for himself to dwell, and this is heaven and earth. And what you do with that is, the last thing is you put an image of the God into this temple. And suddenly, Genesis 1, instead of it being were there 6 days or were there 5 or were there 7 or were there 24 hours, it's actually about when the good Creator God made the world. He made heaven and earth as the space in which he himself was going to dwell, and putting humans into that construct as a way of both reflecting his own love into the world and drawing out the praise and glory from the world back to himself. And that's the literal meaning of Genesis. To flatten that out into, this is simply telling us that the world was made in 6 days, is almost perversely to avoid the real thrust of the narrative. Genesis is one of those books, like a Shakespeare play or like a Beethoven symphony or something, where you can describe what it sort of literally says. Here's a Beethoven symphony, here are the notes, da, 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 da. And you think, well, that doesn't actually catch what's going on in this. And you want to use bigger language about the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. This is an amazing statement about the power of empire and the fate of man and goodness knows what. You still got to play the notes. This world was made to be God's abode, God's home, God's dwelling. He's shared it with us, and he now wants to rescue it and redeem it. So that we have to read Genesis for all it's worth, and to say either history or myth is a way of saying, I'm not going to study this text for all it's worth. I'm just going to flatten it out so that it conforms to the cultural questions that my culture today is telling me to ask. And I think that's a form of actually being unfaithful to the text itself.
The account in Genesis 1 is not intended to be an account of material origins. If that's so, the Bible has no narrative of material origins. And if that's so, then we don't have to defend the Bible's narrative of material origins against a scientific narrative, because the Bible doesn't offer one. We can let the text be what it is and take it for what it is. That's the most literal reading that you could have.